So no soldier would carry all these things. It's too much when you walk everywhere.
Right.
But these are the type of things you would find amongst the men. The expression of camaraderie was, we have drunk from the same canteen. So they would share. So, again, no man would carry all these things. It's too much. But let your eyes go where they want to go. And if you have a question about anything you see, let me know. And
I'd like to know what that is in the pan.
Salt pork.
Salt pork.
Now it's in plastic for the hygiene, you understand. But, you know, no refrigeration in those days.
Sugar? Brown sugar?
Brown sugar.
Yep.
So what you're looking at in the glass bowls, and I wouldn't have carried it that way, of course, is the journey of coffee from the dry bean to the roasted bean to the smithereen, which I did in this frying pan right here, and then did the mortar and pestle bit with the round end of my bayonet. And the army recipe for coffee was 50% coffee, 50% brown sugar. And it would have come in a cone like that.
Wow, what a collection.
And they would have carried it in probably a waterproof bag like that.
But the money was big, the dollar was big.
Well, you know, in those days, the federal government didn't issue the greenback. The banks did to federal regulations. So there was the variety of design from bank to bank. So that's $12. That's a month's pay. Actually, that's $22. I have to adjust that.
And that's something. Tooth polish, tooth powder.
The tooth powder of the time was something like baking soda today.
Oh, okay. Chewing tobacco.
And a bone handle brush and horsehair bristles. Here we go. I'll put this away.
What's your money?
$12 a month, and actually considered quite good pay at the time. And I think it goes to about 14 by the end of the war. Corporals were not paid extra money. Corporals being defined as highly intelligent privates, but they did get double rations. And to our great shame, African American troops were not paid as much. Our great shame today. Though they certainly were brave.
Is that the blankets? That's the bed right there? Uh-oh.
Let me just put this so it
Yeah,
doesn't
put
blow
that
away.
away.
Can't be the spendthrift.
So the wool blanket. The wool is grand for a soldier because it keeps you dry. It keeps you warm even if it's wet. And I have two ways of carrying it here. So on the right is the double bag knapsack, which was a standard federal issue. Two canvas bags, painted back, sewn together, leather straps. Two pockets. And the inside pocket against my back is my wool blanket. And then the outside pocket is an extra shirt, an extra pair of underwear, extra pair of socks, full stop. And whatever my share of this was. This here in the middle is a blanket roll, goes across your chest. And in that I have an extra pair of socks, an extra pair of shirts, and an extra pair of underwear, full stop. Okay. So as the armies gained experience, they got lighter and lighter. So at the beginning of the war, they were in larger tents. But starting in 1862, they began to issue tents like this, the shelter half, or the dog tent, the soldiers called it, because it looked like a dog house. And you know, it's got a row of buttons across the top. And the idea was, you carried half, I carried half. And it might come with poles, but you could also just cut poles like I've done here. Or even more practically, put your bayonet on your rifle, stick the rifle in the ground, each you tie off a half to it. So in the blanket roll, I have a shelter half wrapped around it. And two men would, you know, kind of buddy up, use a modern expression, and put a ground cloth down, which is just canvas, either rubberized or painted black on the one side, put that down, put a blanket down, put two soldiers down, put a blanket on top, put a gum blanket on top of that, and just all kind of screwed together for a while.
Have a game of checkers.
So the army, soldiering is filled with long hours of boredom, great hours of physical exertion and brief moments of terror. So the army, you fill up the time. So you see I painted a checkerboard on my gum blanket. And the army, of course, is full of vices. So I have smoking, chewing tobacco, gambling here with the dice. What else? You see the glass bottle there? That was held spirituous liquor. Now, enlisted men were not allowed to have spirituous liquor, only officers. And they would buy it from the commissary general who fed the army. So the nickname for that was commissary. That's a 165-year-old bottle.
Wow.
It's quite nice. How did they make it?
History collection. And this is the, what do they call this? A rifle or a musket?
This is a rifled musket.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the British Tower musket, which was the best musket in the world at the time. It's about 400 yards range, just short of 58 caliber. It's got grooves cut in it that when the ball goes forward, it spins it. So this is the mini ball. Not called the mini ball because it's small, called because a French captain named Manet kind of perfected the technology. You see there's a little cup in the bottom.
Yes.
So in the Civil War, you build the bullet on the battlefield in a 9-step movement that starts from taking the cartridge, which looks like this, out of your cartridge box. The bullet sits down there on the bottom. In fact, the one physical feature you had to be a soldier in those days was at least 2 of your teeth had to be opposite each other, because one step of the 9 was you tore the cartridge with your teeth. And then you pour the powder down the barrel, push the bullet on top, maybe a little wadding, and you use your rammer to put it all on.
It's great to see that in person. You see it on the movies.
I think they may demo. I don't know if they'll fire here, but a good unit could do that 3 times in a minute. But there's you can see the little hammer there on the rifle, and it's resting on top of a nipple. And on top of that nipple is one of the steps. You put a little percussion cap. It's little brass, like a little stovepipe hat, with a little fulminate of mercury on the inside. So when the hammer falls, it strikes the cap. The cap causes the fulminate of mercury causes a spark. Spark goes through a little hole into the chamber and ignites the powder. And of course, there's only one way for it to go. But because there are grooves cut in the rifle, and the bottom of the mini ball is grooved so that it expands a little bit, and it spins it. So if you think about a football thrown through the air and it spirals, you can throw it 100 yards if you're all pro. But if you were just to push it like a volleyball, it doesn't go as fast. So that spinning cuts through the air.
Fascinating. I'm at my own personal antique roadshow here. Hello. You ever watch it?
Oh, sure,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Now most of this is recreated, but the spiritus, the commissary bottle is original, and actually the bayonet is 160 years old.
Is this cracker called hardtack? Is that hardtack?
That's hardtack, right?
That's hardtack.
Made myself. So hardtack or ship's biscuit is just basically flour and water and a little bit touch of salt, no yeast. It's baked. Sometimes double or triple baked to drive all the moisture out of it. And it would come in a box like that there. You see where it says Army Bread?
Yes.
The box is authentic except for the rope handles, which is just for comfort.
So it's like a cracker.
It is a cracker.
Okay.
So a soldier might get 12 to 15 of those a day.
That's a lot of carbs.
That's a lot of carbs. But they were young men,
They
and
needed it, yeah.
they were doing physical exertion. And it became very hard. A popular song at the time was "Hard Times Come Again No More." Many days have we wearied upon our kitchen door. Hard times come again no more. But the soldiers sang a version called "Hard Crackers Come Again No More." So I've got it wrapped in plastic just for hygiene. You're welcome to pick it up if you like, Mrs. That's just my notebook.
Oh, I thought it was a Bible, somebody's Bible.
No, I have so it's a very literate army. And one of the things that we have today as a great national treasure is the soldiers wrote letters. And a lot of those letters have been preserved. And they were not necessarily censored. So we have great insight into what the individual soldiers thought. And they wrote beautifully.
Yeah.
So it's also an amateur army. So I have a book of hymns. This is period. You're welcome to look at that. That's from the time.
Wow. They kind of thought of everything, didn't they?
Well, you know,
As much as they could.
they lived in the ago doesn't mean they were slow.
Right, there you go.
So so what do we have here again? The soldier is full of long periods of boredom, and you have to occupy yourself. So you can write letters. I have a picture of my sweetheart there in a little letter case from my letter writing material, newspapers when they could get them. And I have a hymn book there, and then it's a self-taught army. So that means, the governor, like Governor Andrew of Massachusetts, appointed a man to be the colonel of the regiment, go raise the regiment, and he recruited the regiment and appointed the officers, and sometimes the officers were elected. And nobody necessarily knew what they were doing.
So how did the Irish regiment come? What did they hear? There's a war, they need us, we support it?
So a couple things. So first of all, in the north, but 170,000 Irish-born people fought in the Civil War, north and south, with the majority to the north. The northern parts being closer to Ireland than the southern parts. Mm-hmm. And they fought for a variety of reasons. They fought for their neighbors. Mm-hmm. They fought because they wanted to, some small percentage wanted to learn military skills to take it back to Ireland. Mm-hmm. They didn't fight for emancipation.
Okay.
Because if the freed black man was here, the Irish guy was a skin above him.
Yeah.
And when nobody was interested in changing places.
Right. That's what it's about, isn't it?
Right.
Power.
So they fought. They felt their own version of racism.
Yeah.
Because the English considered the Irish to be kind of subhuman. No Irish need apply was a very thing into the 1930s. In fact, my dear father was born on the feast of St. Michael, and his Irish-born mother didn't want a son who could be called Mick, because Mick to her was like the N-word.
Okay.
So actually, our name is Jerome, because it's the next saint. The next day, literally. And because of the interwebs, I looked it up, and it's the best of a number of really bad choices. But again, it just shows you it affects the things.
Yeah.
So some Irish wanted to learn military skills to take back to throw the British, the Sassenach, out of Ireland. But a lot of them, and some fought for the money. $12 a month was considered quite good pay.
Okay, nothing was going on, and is it? I'm trying to think. It's not the famine time. The famine.
Yes. So the famine is the decade before.
Before.
Angantamor, the Great Hunger, runs from about 1852 to 1854, maybe 1850 to 1852, something like that.
Okay.
But again, 25% of the people living in New York City at the time of the Civil War were Irish. 170,000. I think only the Germans had a larger kind of population.
Remember that movie Gangs of something in New York?
So Gangs in New York has some accuracy to it.
Yeah.
But I do personally think from my study that the scene in Gangs in New York where they come off the boat and they're put into blue uniforms and handed a rifle and say, go off and fight for Mr. Lincoln, was a little overstated.
Okay.
But this regiment, this is a copy of their recruiting poster. They were raised to be an Irish regiment, to be part of the Irish Brigade. And what's interesting is, so in the American Army, every regiment has two flags. They have the national flag and they have a regimental flag. And the regimental flag is in the color of your branch of arms. So for infantry, that's blue. For cavalry, it's yellow. For artillery, it's red, etc. So every infantry regiment in the Army, U.S. Army, has a blue flag, except they have a green. They are allowed to have a green.
The green flag, yeah.
And actually, we didn't bring it out today, but they said no to their blue flags and carried their own flag. First from the Pilot newspaper in Boston, and then the green flag when they rejoined the Irish Brigade. And it's very interesting because the green flags were so noteworthy. They were not usual. People would remember seeing them, and people would remember seeing what they did. So in some regards, it helped the Irish buy their citizenship. So the unit was predominantly Irish, not 100%, but predominantly Irish. And they were brigaded with 5 other regiments, 3 from New York, again all Irish, and 1 from Pennsylvania, all Irish.
A belt with a cap box and a cartridge box. The cartridge box is what held my ammunition set. Paper cartridge. Jerry probably explained to you. There's black powder in here. The actual mini ball that would be expelled from the musket. This cartridge box with black powder and lead mini balls would be quite heavy. 40 rounds is what we would carry in the battle. During training, we were taught to and learned to shoot 3 rounds a minute. So every minute we've expelled 3 rounds. I carry 40 rounds. If I could shoot 3 rounds a minute when we got the command fire at will, I'm out of ammunition in less than 10 minutes. So you can imagine the firepower, the manpower needed to fight a battle. Certainly when my cartridge box is empty, we could retreat, go back and get restocked, quartermaster, somebody with ammunition to restock.
In the movies, they just make it seem like they'd be just dropping. It's more than they...
Well, as an infantry soldier, my job was not to kill one enemy, but if I wounded one enemy, that means the soldiers on either side of the wounded enemy would pick him up and take him to the rear to the surgeon. Now I've taken 3 people out of the battle line instead of just one person who might have been fatally shot. This breastplate here, the American Eagle, was commonplace amongst infantry Union soldiers. The Confederate Army said that is the target. And early in the war, as Jerry said, that we are not fully trained and high level marksmanship with anything that we've done. To conserve ammunition, sometimes we didn't even shoot around. We went through the 9 steps to load. We went through the mechanics, so we had muscle memory. So we didn't waste ammunition, say, in target practice. When the battles first started in the early part of the war, because of the recoil of the musket would recoil, and many Union soldiers wrote in their diaries in 1861, we heard the mini balls go overhead because they rifled through the tree limbs above us, and then they were covered with leaves and sticks that fell down because of that recoil. So during the Revolutionary War, the soldiers were taught to aim at the knees and hopefully you hit something in the torso because of the recoil of the flintlock.
You guys are amazing. You know, just walking, talking history.
Can you record that and I can take that home and show my wife? Tell her you
this
said
is
I'm amazing.
Yeah.
She's still learning that.
It's on the film.
She's still learning that.
So you guys are like a club. If we get something worthwhile, he'll share it with you.
When you're a granddad, you
Right?
say
Okay. I like
Officer,
to hear your
tell 'em about
comments.
officer duty.
Officer duty.
You're in a captain's uniform?
The captain's uniform, and then I'm on staff. So I'm working for the High Mucky Mucks. When the Civil War, or when the Battle of Fort Stevens took place, there was a huge mustering in of people who were totally not qualified to be soldiers. Clerks, wounded men, just a variety of folks. Nurses.
Which are mostly men.
You know, you'll see places where they say there were 31,000.
Come back in, sir. I just wanted him to speak. Come back in. Go ahead.
You'll see references that there were 31,000 men defending this fort. General Algar, who was command, said of the 31,000 men, about 9,000 were actually fit for duty. And fortunately, the 6th Corps, which was a veteran corps, got off the boat and got up here just in time. It was literally, it had been another 24 hours, would have been a disaster. But anyway, the officer, you'll notice a number of differences. One is I'm not carrying a musket. Another thing, and people are very disappointed at this, I'm not carrying a pistol. And the reason why is if the enemy are close enough that a pistol can solve your problem, a pistol's not going to solve your problem. It was just dead weight. So at the beginning of the war, the officer would be decked out in all kinds of great stuff. And by the end of the war, I probably would be wearing the same kind of trousers he's got, a sack coat, the same. I would always have my captain's bars on, of course. But here I'm a behind the rings kind of guy, so I put on the staff officer uniform.
And your sword.
And the sword, yes. The sword. Let me sort of back up a little bit. When you get to the near end of the war, I was just starting to say, I look pretty much just like a private. But the one thing that I did not give up was the sword. Not because I could do any damage to anybody, but again, like the pistol, if they're close enough to be hit with the sword, they're too close. But what it is it's my mark of leadership. So, for example, if we're in a battle, and battles are very noisy and very, dirty and confusing. If you're this poor little private here and you just need to know what's going on, just look for a guy with the sword. It's his job to know what's going on.
Okay. He's in charge.
The captain and his sword becomes a rally point. In confusion, and if we take massive hits, it means many soldiers are down with wounds or fatally shot. There's a lot of smoke with the musketry, a lot of smoke. And on really hot days, the smoke wouldn't rise. It would just kind of lay across the ground. When the captain holds his sword up and you can hear some sort of verbal command, you didn't necessarily understand all the syllables he was shouting, but the sword would identify the rally point. So we could pick ourselves up and then reform in columns of twos or two files, two ranks.
Two ranks.
Two ranks.
Yeah.
Two files is different. Two ranks of shoulder-to-shoulder infantry soldiers under the direction of a sword. Better yet, if we had colors with us, either the national flag or a regimental flag, that was something we could, because that would be taller. And usually they had a finial on top, which could reflect in the sunlight. That would help direct our attention to that rally point. However, we found out after a few battles that the flag bearer was usually the first target, because both armies followed the same protocol when it came to organization. The command was rally on the colors. If there was complete chaos on the battlefield and you heard the command rally on the colors, as long as you're in Union Blue and you heard the command rally on the colors, you went in the direction of whoever held that flag up. And if I'm the flag bearer and I go down, the man next to me is to pick up the flag and continue with that. So the flag bearer became the target because that created confusion, at least for the short term. Confusion enough that we may not have known which direction to go. If a cannonball blasts in front of us, I'm not injured, but the concussion of that blast causes me to fall down, and I'm a little delusional from that. I probably have temporary hearing loss, and with the smoke and the dirt that's come up from that, I don't know which direction I was going, because I might have been tossed in the air, turned around. So the rally on the colors was one of the greatest commands we could ever hear. That gave us confidence that we were in the right direction and facing where we needed to go, if the captain wasn't available with his sword to follow that same command.
So that's the sword.
So that's the sword.
That's the
right.
symbol.
I now yield to the captain.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I'm a little hoarse from that. So
Yes, I just was fascinated
Yesterday,
by this
busy, commands, drilling.
Okay.
It's understandable to receive her pension from the United States Congress, because it was clearly written that said men serve in the Army, men serve in the Navy, and then you're entitled to this pension or this benefit upon your honorable discharge, of which Frances was honorably discharged. She was mustered out of the infantry, and then she filed her pension papers, and it was denied because she was a woman. And 1888, Congress said she served all 4 years, Michigan infantry, she's entitled to a pension.
Hallelujah.
They didn't make it retroactive. It began in 1888, and she had that pension until her last natural day.
So I'm going to repeat. She went in there as, she signed up as Frank.
Frank. She signed her name in as Frank. Now, this is at a point in time in our history where we didn't have birth certificates, we didn't have an ID, a government issue, no driver's license. We had no papers. If you told me your name was Joe, I would believe you. Why would I say anything different? So you sign in. Or some of the illiterate soldiers would, as we were told, they made their mark, whatever that was. And you see it in the movies where somebody makes an X on the space. But the people made a mark. We call it a signature today, but they made some kind of a mark that identified their uniqueness to service. And it was just your word against my word as the recruiter. When Frances came up and said, "My name is Frank," she signs in thinking as a recruiter, this is another young man coming forward from Michigan to serve in the United States Army. Welcome aboard. We're going to get you to your muster camp in a very short period of time. Stand over here with the other recruits. And these women would disguise themselves intentionally so they could fight for the cause.
And so you said they didn't know they were women until they went to surgery.
Many of these women were not discovered until they went to the surgery tent.
some were discovered just in the normal course of duties and like, particularly if they had joined up to be near their boyfriend. There's a book called They Fought Like Demons, which is about women soldiers in the Civil War. I thoroughly recommend it.
Thank you. They fought like demons.
They fought like demons. It's a very, very interesting book. It has discussions in general, but also a lot of very specific people, where their military experience. There was one, it was a woman who was a cavalryman with a New York regiment who was wounded twice. I got to think to myself, the first guy, I don't want him taking care of me. But anyway, they said that 400 people served in the Federal Army, 400 women. That's a guesstimate that came close enough to the Sanitary Commission, and it was essentially just pulled out of thin air. So we really have no idea. I would submit to you probably more than 400.
So, when you were describing the symbolism of the sword, I thought about Caesar and the colors they used to carry way up high, the banners.
Exactly right.
Is that how maybe that down to us, up to us?
I've never heard anybody describe it that way, but it makes perfect sense.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, the leadership prior to the Civil War and the American Revolution and all that were educated and they spoke Latin and Greek and all that. So it sort of makes sense that would influence the way the army was set up.
That studied
So
war.
to me, yeah. All right.
You need soldiers to man these fortifications. The Federal Army is here. This is your crisis, your time of need, and you don't have the men to do it. Your entire army is down in Virginia fighting in the Confederate capitals in the doorsteps, right? And so you need all hands on deck. So you're pulling disabled veterans, you're pulling government clerks, right? Laborers, typists, these not necessarily forcing, right? But you're also a government employee, so you kind of got to do what your boss tells you to do, right? But these are people who don't have combat experience, who aren't even soldiers being given guns. And you have also newly recruited African Americans from basically a camp of instruction or a basic training camp we call it today. You have the Pentagon called Camp Casey. You have about 250 African American soldiers from Camp Casey who are now being given arms, giving advanced training. They're just enlisting the army, they're new to the military, and are being put into frontline combat service within a month of enlisting, right? It's a pretty big deal. That's not very much a traditional experience for U.S. military soldiers at this stage of the conflict. But there's a crisis. The nation's capital is under direct attack, and we don't have the men to do it. So this station talks about these stories, right? We have something called Case Provisional Brigade, right, which is an ad hoc organization of 3 different regiments that are still recruiting by this stage of the war out at Camp Casey. The 23rd, which is from Northern Virginia, the 27th from Ohio, of all places, and the 31st from my home city of New York, Hart's Island, if you're familiar, which is where they did a lot of the internments for COVID victims early on in 2020 who did not have families to claim their bodies, right? So a pauper's field or a pauper's cemetery, right? But that location is where this regiment comes from. They're all doing some recruiting in the DC area because, of course, with Maryland being a slave state, Virginia being a slave state, and DC becoming more of a sanctuary city for newly freed African Americans coming and seeking new opportunities, employment, right, here in the city. This is a great space to do some recruiting for the U.S. military. And so this just kind of tells the story of some of these different units, right? Just kind of giving a different layer of context to an already really powerful story, right? I think one of the things we're trying to talk about today are these human experiences, right? The story of the people that own the land that this fort was built upon. You have the black community members who were at risk of potentially being sold back into slavery. It happened in July of '63 as the Confederate Army marched into Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. They're capturing 3 African Americans, selling them down south, right? That could have happened here had the Confederate Army broken the defenses. And then also, right, these government clerks, these disabled veterans, these African Americans, right? These heavy artillerists who spent their entire service here having no combat experience, right? People you don't traditionally think of as the heroes of the day, right? Becoming the unsung heroes of this country. Because had this fort fallen, what would have become of the United States of America? Abraham Lincoln would have been captured, right? The entire U.S. government would have fallen, right? The city would have been burning much like it had in 1814 when the British came down. There's a lot at stake. And these unsung heroes become the heroes of these lands. The soldiers, the landowners, right? It was a black woman that owned the property here. It was a farm, right? Her land was taken, her house was torn down, her land was turned into a fortification. She was not really compensated in the way that she should have been for the loss of her house and her land. That was returned, but there was still a massive fort. She donates land to the federal government, right? It becomes a national park. The reason why we can stand here.
But they took it.
They did take it, but she ends up giving it back, right?
Getting it back. She got it back?
She received the land back from the government and then donates it back to the government.
Within what period of time?
This is much more removed from the American Civil. I'm not an expert on her story. I hesitate to say her name because I don't want to get it wrong. But the National Park Service interpreters will be more than happy to tell you more context to that story than I ever could.
What a horrible thing to go through. That you've got this property, you're a black woman, it's the 1800s, and it's taken from you.
Yes. It is.
And what
It is a
happened to her
shame.
house?
Her house was torn down.
It was torn down.
So she was forced to move. I don't know where she moved. Somewhere in D.C. likely. But this is not a unique story, right? This is the county of D.C. We're outside of D.C. state limits, state 64. Florida Avenue, U Street, that area was once called Boundary Street. That was in the boundary of the county where the farmland was and the urban section of Washington, D.C. So this was all farmland. So all of these forts, right, were all put on land that was confiscated, eminent domain, right, from community members. And you never were fairly, you can't compensate a loss. You can't compensate being unhoused for years, right? You can't compensate that in any way. But it's just, I think it's incredible, right, that even all of this, she could have torn this down, right? But she started the idea, hey, this is the battle that saves Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln is under fire for Christ's sake here, right? That stone monument you see there is where Lincoln stood, but he was almost killed here. There was an officer standing next to him who was shot dead when he was standing there by a Confederate sniper in the valley between us and Walter Reed, Organic Society. She recognized there was a story to tell. She was like, I lost my house, lost my land, but we gotta tell the story.
I think that poster might be right there. Might be here.
So one interesting thing about them too, I grew up in this neighborhood, by the way, just across Piney Branch here. Many of those soldiers that are buried up the battleground were immigrants, German, Irish, English, whatever. They were immigrants. And immigrants, just yesterday, they're often, it becomes an issue. And it was the same then. They tried to restrict immigration, tried to restrict how you became a citizen, and so on. But I just really think it's interesting to know that those men who died in this Battle of Fort Stevens, July 11th to 12th, 1864, they were just wrapped up, they were dead, they were just wrapped up in blankets without ceremony or anything. Today, almost 160 years later, those immigrants are now American soldiers.
Well, we'll rally round the flag, boys, we'll rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we'll gather on the hills, well, we'll muster on the plains, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors and up with the stars. Oh, we'll rally round the flag, boys, rally once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. I'm a wounded soldier, and I entertain the camp by playing traditional music that they grew up with in the 1850s and early 60s. And I'm out of Wisconsin, 2nd Artillery, raised in Madison County, Wisconsin.
That must have been comforting for the soldiers.
Well, it was a good pastime. It took their mind off the war, at least for a short period of time. Many of the songs are sorrowful, but it's always good to have a happy song. And sometimes you sing about the enemy. Like, for instance, this particular tune right here. Talks about Alabama. Well, the old blind dog come out of the wilderness, out of the wilderness, out of the wilderness. The old blind dog come out of the wilderness, down in Alabama, down in Alabama, down in Alabama. Well, the old blind dog come out of the wilderness, down in Alabama. Well, the old gray dog, he stole all the victuals, stole all the victuals, stole all the victuals. The old gray dog stole all the victuals down in Alabama. Well, down in Alabama, I'm singing, down in Alabama. The old gray dog, he stole all the victuals, stole all the victuals, stole all the victuals. Old gray dog, he stole all the victuals down in Alabama. Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah. The Camptown racetrack 5 miles long, oh, doo-dah day. Well, I come down here with my hat caved in, doo-dah, doo-dah. I'm going back home with a pocket full of tin, oh, doo-dah day. Gonna run on night I'm gonna run all day. Well, I bet my money on a bobtail nag. Somebody bet on the bay.
Awesome, love it.
Old time too.
Of course, Matthew Brady actually had a studio right by the archives, like 3rd in Pennsylvania. Yes. At the time, prior to the Civil War, they had just come out with the albumin prints. They discovered that you could print on paper with egg white with the nitrate, silver nitrate embedded in the paper. And the other thing is that they had come up with the collodion wet plate process. They would put a glass negative, dip it in this chemical called collodion, and then put it in a bath of silver nitrate. And photographers of the day, if they were taking photographs outside the studio, had to have a wagon, like a portable darkroom.
Right.
When they would take their photograph, they would have to immediately take the negative and fix it. It was wet, and they would have to fix it in order for the print to stay. And then later on, they would make the print later on. But it was all done with a glass negative. So what people don't realize is they recognize the name Matthew Brady, Alex Gartner, other well-known photographers of the day. But there were hundreds of Civil War photographers. In fact, a lot of the large armies gave contracts to photographers to follow the troops. And what the troops wanted were carte de visites. They wanted keepsakes to send back to their family. And so these photographers had these studios in tents, and the soldiers would pay, and it was reasonably inexpensive, and they had special cameras that had 4 lenses, and they would then take the negative and print and keep the negative. What's interesting, like famous personalities like General Grant became collector items, and like baseball cards, people collected these carte de visites. This was just part of the etiquette back then during the Civil War, that when you introduced yourself, it was like a business card. It was called the French carte de visite, or CDV. And soldiers would mail them back to their family, and it was a keepsake. Who knew what was going to happen? So for them, it was a cherished memory to send back to their loved ones.
Are there a lot of those still in existence?
They are. You can go to photo shows and buy these at very reasonable prices.
Really?
Yeah. And one interesting aspect of the war was they became so popular that the government, needing to raise money, they put taxes on these. And so you would have to buy a stamp and put it on the back in order, they collected taxes on these. So they're very, very popular. Millions of these things exist, and you can go to shows today and find them, and they're very, very popular. And it tells a story of these personalities. Some are very well known, others obviously are unknown, but people now with new technologies are able to use facial recognition and other technologies. Can you imagine if they had video? Well, what's really interesting is this is a stereo view, and stereo views were very popular at the time of the American Civil War. And what some people do is they take the 2 images and they oscillate back and forth, and it looks like motion. The Civil War was so well documented that we know so much by detail. And they've colorized some of the photographs, and now you can see even more detail. By the way, the penny, that we still have, that's based on a Matthew Brady photograph of Abraham Lincoln. Photography goes back to like the 1830s, but this wet plate process radically changed the flexibility of people being able to go out. Plus, by the time of the American Civil War, there were hundreds of photographers that knew what they were doing. Matthew Brady, because he became a well-known name, and he had studios in Washington, D.C. and in New York.
My name is Lucy Ann Walker. I'm a laundress. I'm actually from the Fredericksburg, Virginia area, or south from there. And when I found out that the Union troops were in the Fredericksburg area, me and my husband Dabney actually ran to there with our daughter Sarah. They accepted us as contraband. I was a washerwoman or laundress, and he was a scout, and because he knew the area, a scout and a cook. So we were in the area with them across the Rappahannock River where the Confederates, and you can actually see them from that area. So I started doing the laundry, and we started seeing that they had this machine. The Union troops had this machine. It was a telegraph machine. And so Abraham Lincoln was the first president to actually have contact with his troops in the battlefield because they had introduced the telegraph machine during that time. So we got curious as to how it worked, and we came up with a plan. After a while, we decided, I asked permission to leave the Union troop and go over to the Confederates so I can work. They don't really care if I work, where I work, you know. So I went over there, and all of a sudden, Daphne, my husband, had all this intel, you know. The Confederates are going south, the Confederates are north, Robert E. Lee is in the area, all this different information. And so the Union troops asked him, well, how do you know that? How do you know that? You're with us all the time. When we go out to scout, you're with us. How do you know more than we do? And it turned out to be true. And so what he says is that he took them over to an area where you can look across the river and you see a clothesline. And on that clothesline, there were clothing. And he says, my girl, Lucy Ann, is over there. And as she hangs up the clothes, we've got a code. And it tells us what's going on with the Confederates. They talk in front of me all the time, you know, because they think I'm illiterate and don't know any better. So I'm over there and I'm talking and I'm listening and I'm hanging the clothes up, and Daphne's on with the Union and he tells the story of what's going on. And so we continued to do that actually until we left with the Union troops, left Fredericksburg. Ended up here in Washington, D.C. So that's my story actually. And so normally I have the whole laundry set up. Today I have the sewing set up, but I'd have the wash pans, everything that you need to do laundry during the Civil War. Washboards. The one lady out there doing laundry right now, she has,
But laundresses had quite a bit of equipment to bring out, which included all of their soaps and cleaning, products and chemicals and things. Bluing was still a thing at that time. So I mean, it still is now. You can still buy bluing.
Yeah.
But it was something that was more common practice. So I started sorting some of the things that will be washed sort of together. The pants, things that need mended are over there. So laundresses did a mixture of things, but it was all for a fee. So they were paid per job and by individual soldiers, so they weren't on sort of a company or a regiment payroll or anything like that. But if they were associated or connected in some way with a field hospital, they would also do the cleaning for the bandages, the bedding, the various different things. So we've got an apron that had been used for processing chicken in the kitchen, and then also some medical bandages as well, that those will get cleaned. They'll never be quite whitened again.
Is bluing like bleach?
It's supposed to be. Adding the blue pigment, it brightens the whites, but it doesn't actually lift, stains and things out of it. It just brightens and enhances the color. So you can still find bluing in stores today, which is pretty neat. But laundresses did laundry from sunup to sundown and at any time in between, because they were very motivated to accumulate, as many jobs as they could. And if they had a family with them, the family would be involved in some way. Small kids could help with putting things on a line to dry, maybe carrying small buckets of water. So we've got some different size buckets here that the laundress would actually be set aside from camp, but near some sort of water source, so that she could easily go and source water for all of the various washing that she would need to do. And if you've got your regular soap cycle, and then your rinsing cycle, and we've got some reproduction lye soap in here that is missing a couple of the ingredients that aren't quite safe for use today. But I do use this soap when I demonstrate using the wash and doing the wash.
And then they iron too.
For an extra charge, yes. So you get the term ironing board actually from. This is one thing I'm going to add to my display, is they would set up a literal board, just a board, across two chairs or something like that, and so that is your ironing board, because it was easily portable. You could just take it apart and whatnot, so it would fit easily on a wagon So they would probably have a wagon or mules or something to help transport this large amount of equipment because it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. That iron looks dangerous. Like a weapon.
They can't. Well, you want to feel how heavy it is?
I'm telling you.
So this one is kind of interesting.
Oh, wow.
So I just locked it because this one actually opens. This is a locking mechanism, and you'd put the coals and things in here, and that would heat the bottom, so that would prevent it from getting blackened over a fire or anything like that, or on a stove top where there's soot and anything that could then, you just blued your lovely whites, and then you're going to start, and iron a shirt and black smear across it. That would ruin your day. But there's actually a photo of a laundress, a really famous photo of a laundress in camp with her family. She's got her 2 children, her husband, and there's a puppy in it. And there's 2 photos of it. So it is staged because they moved things around in between taking the photos. And this is hidden underneath of a chair, very much like that one. And then in the next photo, the chair has been moved, and you can see this very clearly. So it's kind of interesting. I had this since I was a teenager. I got it from I don't even know where, and had it on a bookshelf just because I thought it was neat, and now it gets to come out and help tell the story of regimental laundresses.
You got a nice collection. Really nice.
Thank you. It's sourced from all over. There's no one place to really find any of these things.
Is this you, the country?
The washerwomen?
Washerwomen?
Yeah, company or regimental washerwomen. Yeah. So they were usually married to an officer of the regiment or company. And she would have to have character recommendations, so kind of people to vouch for her as someone of good moral standing, so she's not going to act inappropriately with the other soldiers. And that's part of why they were also kept set aside from camp, because it wasn't proper to have women directly in camp at that time to be exposed, to all of the improper behavior and language and half-clothed men and whatnot that were in camp. But she would travel with the Army, one of the few women to really travel with the Army as officers' wives and women that were doing really specific tasks and whatnot, and was an incredible help. A lot of men. So how she would get paid in some instances if men didn't have the money readily available, and everything was in cash. But they did run lines of credit, which were reinforced by the paymasters. So they would keep ledger books. I have just a regular sketchbook here, blank pages that then in the book you'd flip open to a page and just keep track. Document the man's name, what work you did for him, the task, the price, what his total was then, and then at the next payday, whenever that was, if it was delayed, it would take some more time, but she would go and stand kind of close to the paymaster and watch as the men came up, and she would keep track with her ledger book, and as they came up she would step forward, tell the paymaster what is owed to her. She would be paid first what is owed to her, and then the soldier would be paid whatever the balance is, which is really an interesting way of keeping track and running a line of credit without sort of the fear, of maybe not getting paid. Not to say it maybe didn't work out all the time, and if there was delays or whatnot, but
so this big stick was the stir.
Yeah, well, I have a couple different ones.
Yeah.
Because they could be used for different things, but oftentimes they would have tables as well and other crates to keep from having to bend over quite as far. So it could also use a longer stir like this in order to agitate in the rinse. So this is your soap cycle and rinse cycle over here. And then in between you could have a wringer like this. This is a very early wringer I'm planning to restore. So this was a Facebook Marketplace find, which is really, you never know what you're going to find. This as well, Facebook Marketplace, so 10 out of 10 recommend. But I plan to restore this so that it's a bit more functional and add the clasps and things, because it would be situated, it would have clasps or some sort of gripping mechanism on the bottom to attach it to the side of your wash basin, and then you can feed things through it to rinse out the soap and additional water and into your next cycle, or it could go at the end to wring it out before you dry it so that it's not dripping as you go to dry it and have all that extra weight on the line. So this one is almost entirely wood, so it has no rubber as part of it, which you start to see later on. And this is really interesting because I haven't been able to find any diagrams or anything really related to it yet, so I plan on sitting and doing more research on this specific machine, but really unique.
really unique collection.
Thank you.
Good
It's
job.
passion project,
Yes,
so to say.
yes,
Give
it's
more
love.
voices to the
Yeah,
women.
yeah, history.
There are things we're fighting for. Freedom being one of the most important.
Soldiers frequently had to readjust their equipment
War doesn't change that much.
during battle.
War doesn't change that much, but warfare changes very dramatically.
Artifacts have been found on the battlefield of these
So one of the things about
belt
the Civil
buckles
War is
and other items that
is
came
it the
off
last
of
war fought
soldiers'
on the Napoleonic
uniforms.
side, or is it the first war that's more like World War I? And by the 1864, the Union.
My name is Mary Ellen Pleasant, and I am the first self-made millionaire of our time. I grew up, I was born in Philadelphia. Nobody really knows where exactly I was born. Some people say I was from Virginia. I say I'm from Philadelphia because I was free. I was raised by Quakers in Massachusetts, the Gardner family. Their son Thomas taught me how to read. Actually, I never really truly had a formal education. I was able to read men and women. So I learned how to create a business. On my commute from the East Coast to California, during the gold rush, I cooked, I sewed, I did crochet, and I learned how to tell people, well, yes, I'm telling my story. I cooked, and I owned a restaurant. I opened the first restaurant in California my very first restaurant was called Case and Heiser. I befriended a man, a financial banker named Thomas Bell, and he helped me commission my mansion. But I'm not crazy. You know, I know as an African American, I can't hold any property. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna work as the housekeeper. And believe you me, I ran that household. Not a dime went out of there without me knowing it. They had to ask me, and then I would let Mr. Bell know whether it was okay for them to spend their money. Now, how's that?
That was great.
Now, Mr. Bell unfortunately did have an accident later on in life. But guess what? I kept my money. And I took the first $10,000 and helped found St. Mary's College in California. So I got to keep all of my investments. Unfortunately, his wife was trying to be greedy, did a lawsuit. But guess what? Even by the time I had passed away, it still wasn't settled. I still had my money. So this is all about me, and here are some of the products that we would sell as ladies during the Civil War. We would create hats, gloves. You know, we would, our pastime was crocheting. So we learned how to sew and do all kinds of things. And as a lady, you had to be covered from neck to foot. Had to. I couldn't show any arms. Bare arms was a no-no. And an ankle? Oh my gracious, that was scandalous. During the day, you could not. During the evening, you may be able to show some of your chest. But that was during supper. And there were 4 meals during the day. There was breakfast, there was lunch, there was dinner, and then there was supper. So there was 4 meals.
Snacks, right?
Well.
Yeah, that's
Yep. So, but we would learn how to quilt. We did quilting, and actually quilting was how we learned how to do the civil, do the Underground Railroad. So we would make quilts. Oh, I'm sorry. We would make quilts, and depending on which way the pattern went, was telling people when it was safe to travel or when it wasn't. Now, my friend, one of my friends, she and her husband, she became a nurse for the Union or the Confederacy, and her husband was a Union in the Union Army. And if she hung a certain color material out on the line. That's when he knew it was safe for people to travel, or when to start getting people out. So this is how they did the Underground Railroad. Now for me, Mary Ellen, I was so good, they tried to catch me. And then it got too hot for me, so I had to bounce. I had to go. Because if I was caught, then I could be tried in prison.
Yeah.
For trying to help enslaved slaves leave to freedom.
That's how I know.
My name is V, and I'm with the United States Sanitary Commission. It provides relief to the soldiers. They raise money. They gather goods and materials that would provide comforts to the soldiers from home. But they also build hospitals, hospital ships. They staff the hospitals. They supply the hospitals. They even raise huge amounts of money by having what they called sanitary fairs. Literally millions of dollars.
What is a sanitary fair?
It is like a church bazaar on steroids. It was like, take a church fair and blow it up to city size and have every important dignitary visit it, have people from every neighborhood in town contribute things, run it, and then attend it and spend their money.
Wow, incredible. And the table you have right down here, is a lot of the items on there what they would buy?
No, this is actually the money that they bought, that they collected from those fairs. You would have medicinal wine. You would have vinegars. You would have lots of shirts, drawers. You would have dressing gowns, sheets, towels, all the things that you need. They could even supply tin cups to the soldiers in the hospitals because, when you were hit, probably everything you had was left behind. So you could make sure that they got their letters that they wrote home, got home to them. You could supply writing materials, reading materials.
Reading materials, right?
Harper's Weekly, I can get those, so I put those out. They cover all kinds of things. There's a wounded soldier there being taken care of.
Hi there.
Hello.
Is that chewing gum?
It's supposed to be medicine.
Oh, okay.
But if you can't put like real morphine or anything, for some reason they won't let us put that. I wonder why.
You sure look pretty in your fancy dress.
Thank you.
Fair hat.
Thank you.
This is the 1800s?
Yes, 1860s. So we're raising money for the civil, or actually, at this point we've raised money for the soldiers, and we're sending them all kinds of supplies, shirts, and even underwear, bandages to the hospitals, medicines to the hospitals. They built hospital ships. They staffed them. They trained nurses to go and volunteer their services. So it's parallel to the Army. The Army also has nurses. But the Sanitary Commission is separate, and they are authorized by the government, but they are separate. But they raise enough money, they built enough hospital ships that there's a couple that they do give to the Army because they have enough.
That's wonderful. Do you mind if I look at those underwear?
Oh, sure. Those uniforms, the scratchy uniforms they wear?
Yeah.
Yeah. The original ones were probably heavier. My friend that made these, this was her first attempt, so she was making them out of Osnaburg, but she said she thought that the material ones that they usually had were probably a little tougher to stand up to the washing. So this was her first attempt.
We met the washing lady over there.
She probably knows better than I do that you could buy, and these are just reproductions of them. You could probably even find originals in places, but they do sell, and still you can find the reproductions.
These were given to the soldiers.
Well, you could supply the soldiers with reading material. Yes, that would be something. You could also. The way this worked, it was a lot of organizations got together. So you'd have a church sewing circle from like every church in the city. You'd have maybe like a women's discussion group or whatever. And the war starts and they all start knitting, sewing, and whatever, but their efforts aren't being coordinated. Now in New York, what they started was they called it the Women's Central Association of Relief, which in early April of 1861 started saying we have to coordinate our efforts. And that's basically what the Sanitary Commission did. The Women's Central Association of Relief became a auxiliary of the Sanitary Commission, and so did other groups. And so you were still operating as your church group, but you might get a call like, we need hospital quilts, and those two are original ones. We need hospital quilts, and they, but it's not for the soldiers from DC, it's from soldiers from Iowa. But the soldiers from DC, they need drawers, but some ladies from Pennsylvania are making those. And so because they're like really, they've already got a stock, they're going to add some more, they're going to ship them off, and while you're sending off the quilts that you've been making. So you know that the idea is that everybody is going to get what they need. You may not be able to supply it directly to your husband, your father, your son, but you know that some other woman will. Because you're going to be looking out for her husband, father, son, brother.
Beautiful. So are your eyeglasses period piece, or are those now?
These are originals.
They look good on you.
Thank you.
Can you see them?
Yeah, I've got a prescription. You can get the kind where you can put this prescription in.
Okay.
So
lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Pretty girl. Two pretty girls. You keep waiting.
Wait a minute, get this. Let me get this.
Hey, pretty girl. 1843? 2020.